everyone! One of my most frequent requests for book recommendations are for books about Hurricane Katrina. It is difficult if you're just starting out to figure out which book you might want to start with. I used to live in New Orleans and I have done research on Hurricane Katrina specifically, so I have read many dozens of books about Katrina. I have pulled aside the books that I find myself recommending most frequently to people. There are many other really good books written about Katrina, but are more tailored towards a very specific issue. So in this video, I'm going to recommend books that are more general. The first book I have is called Breach of Faith, Hurricane Katrina and the Near Death of a Great American City by Jed Horn. This book came out at the end of 2005, right after the storm had happened. So this focuses on the immediate response to Katrina, what exactly happened in the days leading up to Katrina, and what happened during Katrina. Jed Horn was a writer for the Times-Picayune at the time, the local paper in New Orleans, so he put this together based on the reporting that he did during the storm. I think that this book gives the best general overview for the immediate response. This book comes in at 400 pages, which seems pretty long, but considering the subject matter is actually quite brief. I think that this is the best book to start with if you don't know anything about Katrina and you just kind of want to know some of the basic facts about it. The next book I have is The Great Deluge, Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans, and the Mississippi Gulf Coast by Douglas Brinkley. This book is 200 pages longer than Breach of Faith, and it also goes into a little bit more detail about what came in the months after. This was published in 2006, so a bit more time had passed as compared to when Breach of Faith came out. So those are the two main differences. They're both great books. Either one of them will be a good starting place. I have been unable to find a book about Katrina's recovery that I think adequately describes all of the issues related to the recovery process and has both breadth and depth. One challenge with writing a disaster recovery book is that you need to wait for the recovery process to be over. In New Orleans, the city itself does consider the recovery to have occurred. However, there are a number of grassroots organizations working in different neighborhoods throughout the city on recovery-related needs. So I am hopeful that in the next year or two we will start seeing some larger texts written about the recovery. In the meantime, I do have two recovery-related books that I tend to recommend. The first one I have is called Katrina After the Flood by Gary Rivlin. This book was published in 2015 on the 10-year anniversary, so we were definitely well into the recovery process when this book came out. The thing that I really like about this book is that it follows a couple people throughout their recovery process, starting with the impacts they experienced during the response. So you really get a sense of some of the frustrations and challenges that people have gone through in New Orleans during the recovery process. This next book that I recommend is called We're Still Here, You Bastards: How the People of New Orleans Rebuilt Their City. I really enjoyed this book. It's actually one of my all-time favorite Katrina books. I think that this does the best job of any book I've read at capturing the frustrations of New Orleanians during the recovery process. She talks about the criminal justice system and the education system, how grassroots efforts have been central to the recovery process, about cultural and environmental issues related to Katrina. So I really like this book for the breadth of topics that it covers. One of my most frequent complaints about Katrina books is how they handle the issue of race. So I have found this book that I find myself recommending a lot. It is called Come Hell or High Water, Hurricane Katrina and the Color of Disaster by Michael Eric Dyson. The book looks at how systemic racism within government policy has led to some of the impacts we saw during Katrina, and how government policies did not account for people of color during the recovery process. This is definitely the best book that I have read on the issue of race and Katrina. I will say that my critique of this book is that Dyson doesn't have a disaster background specifically, and so at times there's a bit of nuance that is lost. I will say that this book is a pretty quick read. It's only about 200 pages. This next book I have is called Voices from the Storm the people of New Orleans on Hurricane Katrina and its aftermath. It was edited and compiled by Lola Volin and Chris Ying. This is one of the best books I have found that is a compilation of people's stories. There are a few others out there that take this approach of putting together in one text the firsthand accounts of multiple survivors. And the last book I have to recommend is Why New Orleans Matters by Tom Piazza. It's a really quick read. It's under 200 pages and is little. I like recommending this book to people who suggest that New Orleans should not have been rebuilt after Katrina, or suggest that efforts shouldn't be made to protect the city. There are essentially two arguments for rebuilding New Orleans after Katrina. The first was a practical, logistical, and economic reason to rebuild the city, and the second was because of the strong cultural and social ties. This book deals with those social and cultural ties. It explains why New Orleans is important for the people who live there, but also for the rest of the country. Like I said, there are a lot of other Katrina books out there, and I suspect there will be many more in the years to come. So my recommendations may change in the future. For now, all of the books that I mentioned will be linked below, so you can go check them out.